the 12th of August. Sorry, that was my alarm. That doesn't. I'm always on the ball, so that normally never happens. That's always set though, and tonight whatever. I'm Dana Durnford, the nuclear proctologist.org, and you can call in at 709-589-4406. 4406. You can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And if I hear it, I will answer the phone. The sneaky, disgusting nuclear industry. Atoms for peace. The A-10 Warthog, that's your atoms for peace. It only shoots dirty bombs. Every bullet is a dirty bomb. It's the depleted uranium that they're actually using for this is left over from a chain reaction. So the bullets have already gone, that's the gallows laugh, by the way, have already gone through a chain reaction. And they're pyrophoric, which means it catches fire as they're going through the air, releasing trillions of atoms of fission products. They're dirty bombs. And it fires the animosity equivalent of 700 Nagasaki bombs worth of radiation per minute. 1.5 tons of dirty bombs a minute. Your atoms for humanity. I remember the first time I showed that picture, I literally got no views for the first 2 days on the video because the military is monitoring me because they're a bunch of rapists and murderers. Thanks, Daryl, Timo, John 2H, Dana Nasana, Tom. Hi, everybody. Atoms for Humanity. Ted Richards. Hello, everybody. Okay, so Unit 4, that's what's left of the building. And reactor core is right here. Goes almost to the top of the building. And the fuel pools, which is decades of reactor cores. Wrap your mind around what I'm saying to you. Decades of Chernobyls. Now, Chernobyl was a 200-ton reactor. That's a 1,000-ton or 800-ton reactor. But Chernobyl was had a graphite moderator, which is not radioactive. These reactors in Japan are pure uranium, pure plutonium. So each core is at least 100 Chernobyls. It's actually much more than that because it's pure uranium, pure plutonium with no moderator. Like Chernobyl was a brand new reactor. It has 40 years of reactor cores stored at the top of the buildings. Read it and weep. So look at the building to your left. It's supposed to be the same height as the building to your right. So they hoodwinked you on a whole new scale. I'm just going to play this little song from the 1950s of how they had folk songs promoting blowing up countries with nuclear weapons.
There will soon be an end to this cold and wicked war when those hard-headed communists get what they're looking for. Only one thing that will stop them, and their atrocious fun. If General MacArthur drops an atomic bomb, they'll be fired dust and metal flying all around, and the radioactivity will burn them to the ground. If there's any commies left, they'll be all on the run. If General MacArthur drops an atomic bomb.
And so they were promoting hell, right? So before we jump into this story, because it's a complicated story, not much I can do about it, eh? I'm going to play a clip. I played it yesterday, but it's part of the story tonight. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I got a... This is yesterday now on the boat. It's not on. I checked the oil. So it's a warning light. I'm going to go back in, take it out of the water, go home, pull the spark plugs, check the filters, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And so here's a clip from today. DF 115 fuel injection. And so when I turn it on, now this is the rev, that's the oil, that's the temperature, and that's a general light, probably for codes. And so I'm going to turn it on. So it's 3 beeps and 1 beep, and people were, I put this video on my site today, and people were, well, look it up on Google or look it up on search engines. It's like, if you read the description, you know I'd done that for hours this morning. So because everybody was insisting that I'm stupid, I took the video down. I called every dealership within a 2,500 mile circumference. That includes America and Canada. And 2 guys got back to me, and they both told me the same thing, that code, I'll better show you the, hang on there. They told me that the code, now what have I got done? Scumbags. Don't even ask me. They told me the code was, what have I got done wrong here? Just hang on 1 second. Oh, it's right there. They told me that the code is the IAC. It sounded like they said IAE. IAC valve. And that the idle control valve enables stable engine idle speeds. Blah, blah, blah. If your engine is having trouble maintaining an idle or stops abruptly, that's exactly what happened to me. So that is exactly, where'd you go? That's exactly what happened to me. Was my engine, I had to put the idle up to get it to start. But if your idle's up, you can't put it in gear, right? And so I couldn't make it home. I'm out in the ocean. I got a kicker, but the kicker wasn't pumping water. It's a brand new engine, wasn't only used for a couple of emergencies, right? But I always start the engine up. And yesterday I didn't. And I put the engine down, and the bloody thing wasn't pumping water. And I was like, oh crap, I won't make it very far, it'll overheat. But 2 of them got back to me. That's actually, and he told me what the code was. I looked it up, and I seen that description. That was exactly what was happening. So I agree with him. And I read the rest of the stuff on that. I actually read all the blogs this morning, but I wasn't aware of the location of it. So that's what it looks like. And then it's located by the manifold. There's a picture of it there. But anyway, it's located by the manifold. The air goes through it, heats up, and it controls the flow, right? Going into the injectors, blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, it's $271. Plus, I got to drive to St. John's to pick it up. It's about that price, right? I got to drive to St. John's to pick it up. I can probably install it myself. I'm not sure yet. But we got to get back on the ocean to do a species count because of Fukushima. But anyway, that's we got a diagnosis. And let's get on with the show. That's important. So there's links below to donate. I'm actually bankrupt at this stage, and they took down my site last week, right? My YouTube channel with 24,000 subscribers. So it's super hard. We raised $16 a day and $75 in the last 4 days. And so that's $80. So we need to raise, probably best to get somebody to install it. Anyway, whatever. So hopefully people donate. And if not, then I got to do a fundraiser tomorrow to raise the money, because I'm not very good at giving up. It's a flaw, man. I am literally worn out today from dealing with this. I ran into the ground. And my apologies, but we got to talk about this stuff. Japan is working to speed up decommissioning. No, hang on. Okay, so reactor 4. I just explained that at the beginning. Here's what Russia Today said on day 2 of the accident in comparison of Chernobyl. And that's reactor 4, by the way, to the right.
The fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl.
Is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl. So when you look at this picture here, what they done was they built this structure with cranes and they put panels around it. Then they claimed that it looked like this here, but it actually looked like that. They just put a cover over. It doesn't physically touch it. There's no integrity, obviously, right? But think about this headline here. If number 4 collapses, it's 2012, Japan will be evacuated. Japan, because of radioactive fallout, right? So the media worldwide decided to come out and pretend that reactor 4 over there didn't collapse. And there's nothing like hearing this yourself. So let's play that little clip.
I was standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4.
Now that's Rupert Winfield Hayes at the BBC pretending he's 100 feet above the cap you see to the left. Wrap your mind around that again.
Where I was standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
Okay, so how many people think that they're actually above a melter reactor? None, right? Not even nuclear scientists are willing to come here and say, oh no, they're above the building, Dana. Now the fuel pool, why are fuel pools important? Well, here's a story out of Korea. If in case of fire at spent nuclear fuel in South Korea, 24 million would need to be evacuated. But if the cooling system fails, it can melt down. So they would have to evacuate 67,000 square kilometers of Japan and China could taint half of South Korea. Not taint it. It's like radioactive fallout is not tainting something. You're destroying it permanently. You can trick people into staying there, but it doesn't mean that it's not destroyed. And those people should be publicly executed that are tricking people. Because that's what we see going on, right? There's no reason not to hold them accountable. There's no reason not to put them in jail. There's no reason that the majority of them shouldn't be convicted in by law, which doesn't exist anymore. And if they were convicted by law, they would be publicly executed because there's so many of them. We actually need a Nuremberg trial. But anyway, there's about 1,000 kinds of radioactive material. Now, we had a comment last night after the show, why are they only talking about cesium and iodine? Because it's hard to wrap your mind around it, I'm sure, if you're not familiar. And because I cover it so much, it's like a blah, 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 blah. So there's 1,000 kinds of radioactive materials released. It's plutonium. The biggest byproducts is the curium isotope. So they talk about iodine because it has an 8-day half-life, and the average person can't wrap their mind around it, thinks it's gone in 8 days, right? So 2 weeks later, they're like, well, who cares? It's gone in 8 days. It's gone. It doesn't matter anymore. And that's what they're telling you that. And in the cesium-137, if you look at, and we've covered tens of thousands of academic studies here, well, on my other site that you took down last week with 24,000 subscribers, tens of thousands of studies. I'm going to have to cover again now, which is fine. It's great. So tens of thousands of studies on radiation. Almost all of them were talking about cesium. They can't get funding if they're going to talk about curium. Well, they can, but it's very rare. And certain applications where they can get funding to cover those studies. So, because brainwashing, you got to tell the same lie over and over, generation after generation. So, cesium and iodine were the brainwashing to disarm the population when it comes to nuclear, and that's been going on since 1945. And so they can't really start talking about other isotopes very often, because people that have been brainwashed all of a sudden are like, what? There's another isotope? Officials admit decontamination only reduces external exposure. So Swanee D was trying to figure out the difference between internal exposures and external exposures. I really got to do a video on it at some point in the near future, because that's a great idea. We're aware of the need to prevent radiation in food, but it's outside our jurisdiction. Officials. What do you mean it's outside your jurisdiction? You kooky whack job. So external doses, so some of it lands on your hair and your face and your hands, but you got clothes on, right? There's a problem with that though, because when you go home, you're not going to throw your clothes away. You're going to do the opposite. You're going to put it in the washer with all your sheets and your children's clothing and everything else, right? You're going to contaminate everything. And so that can still get into your body, because the radiation is so tiny, it can actually get in your body through the hair and the pore on your body and the pores of your body. But internal doses are 1 trillion times worse than external doses. So internal doses goes in your body, and it attaches, because it's electrically charged, it attaches itself to your organs, your muscles, your bones, and they call it sequestering, where it pulses energy every second. So the internal stuff, your body is going to attack that with white blood cells immediately, sustained for the rest of your life. And which means, with white blood cells, which means that's displacing your red blood cells, which carry oxygen and nutrition throughout your body. So you become lethargic, and you got less oxygen, you're less motivated, you feel tired all the time. What's going on is your body immune system is now compromised. You're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally innocuous and benign and harmless, right? So internal doses are brutal. They're brutal. and they're pulsing energy through all your organs at the one time on the internal. External does the same thing, but not effective as the internal. And internal is forever. It's forever and ever and ever. And so internal doses, when you see air samples, that means you're going to be breathing it in. Air samples in Tokyo are 270 times more contaminated. Well, again, you see the cesium-137, which is meant to downplay the major byproducts, which is curium and plutonium, uranium. So 270 times more contaminated than global weapons failure peak. So that tells you had multiple meltdowns when you got a plume like that several hundred kilometers away. That's absurd. Tokyo is supposed to be evacuated, but again, the nuclear industry can't sustain a nuclear meltdown. The industry will collapse. And then you'll start questioning why you're using nuclear in a hospital, which is what you should be doing, right? There should be a picket line outside of every hospital on this planet that uses nuclear. It's actually evil. Did Fukushima Daiichi Unit 4 catch on fire today? So we're talking about Unit 4 tonight. Nuclear engineer, enormous amount of plutonium. I actually got a mathematical number coming up from you. Those fuel pools had all together, the reactor cores and the fuel pools had roughly 18,000 pounds of plutonium. Try wrapping your mind around that number. I'll show it to you coming up. Number 4, spent fuel pool is in danger of catching fire. The pool is cracking and leaking. So immediately after detonation, this is what it looked like to the right. This was that's a 190-foot building you're looking at there. These buildings were built to take a detonation and a pulse, by the way. And as you can see, what it should look like on the inside at the top of the building to the left, which is important for the rest of the story. Radiation is streaming into the atmosphere after number 4 pool boiled dry in the fire. So when you look at this picture to the right, it's easy to appreciate that headline, right? That the fuel pool had boiled dry and detonated and was burning, right? That makes sense? Okay, all right. So what they decided to do was fake the picture to the left, pretend that that was the picture to the right. So the building to the right is supposed to be 190 feet high. Those people, that's Photoshop. If you stand up there, you're actually going to die. So if it's not Photoshop, they would have died that day. So what they done was they raised the building from here to there, and then they put with cranes a structure over it like that. Now when you look at this structure, this is mimic, the fuel pools would be up here, see? Now if you look at there and look at here, you can see the building, the guts are completely destroyed. And the other picture shows this. So they built this structure with cranes and homeless. They put the panels on it with cranes, not people, but cranes. And there's one of the cranes. Then they claimed this 2013 that it looked like that. That's actually probably somewhere in America, because America, I'm not sure the exact number, around 60 of American reactors are exactly like Fukushima reactors. So Unit 4 had a major impulse sound, damage to the roof on March the 14th. Fire was seen hours later, then again the next day. A pyrophoric fire may have already occurred at the Unit 4 spent fuel pool, and the explosion is possibly due to rods not being covered with water. So if the rods are not covered with water, they have a zirconium cladding. And zirconium cladding, if it's exposed to air, will catch fire, very hot fire too, and then that sets the stage to burn the fuel. So both of these are the official pictures. That picture is the one they showed you. This is the one they won't show you. And they show you that one is to manipulate you strictly. Same as that picture here. This is simply not true. If it is, they would have died within an hour or two of being that close to reactor 4. So here's a Yale University professor. Yale, if you look up Yale University, it's considered one of the most prestigious institutions on the planet. It's actually full of scumbags and degenerates and their children. Nothing like this has ever been attempted, Yale professor. All of humanity will be threatened for thousands of years if the rods in the Unit 4 fuel pool collapses, touches, and have a nuclear reaction. Okay, so there is no fuel pool though. So that was the hoodwinking you had. In order for the hoodwinking to work, you had to get all the universities, Yale is just one of the many ones, and the medias, and obviously you can see Useful Idiot Media done it, I played a clip already for you, to tell the same lie to the population. Nobody could tell you a different story because you start raising the interest. Okay, so it's actually around 3,400 assemblies. Each assembly is close to a ton per fuel pool. 3,400 times 1,800 is the rough number. It's around 5 to 6 million pounds per pool, but there's multiple pools in each building. And the common spent fuel pool had around 10 million that they admit to, which you can probably double the number. You can't take any of their numbers. Okay, so what they done was they built this structure with cranes over the building to the right. It doesn't physically touch it. And now you can see the building to the left, or that building there, can't possibly be inside of this destroyed buildings because the building is leveled, as I just showed you. But what you're seeing now, and this is an unusual picture, this was extracted from a single picture that was very high quality from a Japanese story that I was able to zoom in on. We've never seen these pictures before. You won't see this anywhere else on the planet. And so you can see all the debris on that side of reactor 4 because it's lethal doses. You can't remove it, and therefore you couldn't possibly be in the building. Now they've done the same thing for reactor 3 to your left and reactor 4 to your right. They faked it. The next show is going to be on this building to your left, reactor 3. Japan is working to speed up decommissioning of Fukushima. So 2013. So the workers were paid $11 USD per day. $11 a day to work at a nuclear meltdown. Does that sound like Yale University nuclear scientists getting $11 a day? Does that sound like... Now what was interesting about this is you had over 50 reactors in Japan. And each of these reactors had employed thousands of people. And so they didn't volunteer. None of the reactor power plant employees volunteered to go to work at Fukushima. There was no volunteers from other nuclear power plants around the planet. There was no nuclear corporations, no nuclear universities, no nuclear academics, no nuclear students have ever went there. And the people that are there are the impoverished, and they need someone to speak out for them. They have a right to live. Just because they're disadvantaged don't mean they're not people. Just by the luck, it could be you, see? So $11 per day to work at a nuclear meltdown. It was so dangerous, 16,000 workers quit. Okay, half of Fukushima workers may be illegally contracted on top of that, which they were. And in this picture here, you see they're walking on steel plates. Now, when they had the nuclear meltdown, happened the detonations through fuel rods and pellets, which are full of pellets. A lot of the pellets and fuel assemblies actually landed all over the place. They used remote-controlled bulldozers to bury them on the spot because there's lethal doses everywhere. And then they paved over that. They put cement on top of that. They put steel plates. Then they paved over it again to try to get the numbers down so they can send in the homeless. So every time you see people, that's actually homeless. 2018, the airborne radiation near the plant, not at the plant itself, just near it, are far higher than the government's max. So you can imagine how dangerous. Like, if you're able to wrap your mind around the actual facts that I'm trying to convey to you, you would be just like me, where you go to war every single day. I wake up running every morning. I wake up at war every day. I wake up and I'm busy. I'm busy. I'm second gear. I have the kettle on. At best, I get 2 or 3 sips out of my cup of tea every morning because I am running. This is not a game, okay? Worst case scenario was abandon Tokyo. No. Abandoning Japan in the northern hemisphere. But still, just abandoning Tokyo, obviously, 36 million people, metropolitan Tokyo is significant, obviously, right? So nuclear power has some absurd, disgusting, despicable, brutal attributes. And they've been hoodwinking you for 75 years. They should all be publicly jailed forever, every one of them. They have no right to have a driver's license. They have no right to have children. They have no right to be on this planet with us. They have hoodwinked this entire planet for 75 years, and now we're on the doorstep of hell because of Fukushima. As the public, possibly worldwide, sickens over time, as everybody on the planet sickens over time. Wrap your mind around that statement, because you can't do that without making every species on the planet sick too, or dead. This is what I mean. They need to be held accountable. This is why they took down my other channel, is because they're parasites. They're actual parasites. People in the nuclear industry are parasites. Their parents were parasites. Their parents were parasites. Their parents were parasites. I mean bad parasites too. To work at Fukushima is equivalent to be given an order to die, says a radiation expert, which is 100% accurate. They're making $11 a day, and they get a $190 taxi ride from workers to get home from the free medical clinic where they said there's nothing wrong with them, owned by Tepco. Work at Fukushima plant to go on for 10,000 years. Now, I'm trying to build you a picture of this whole bloody story, but we're going to cover lots of Unit 4 coming up. Monitor detects 100,000 sieverts an hour at Fukushima. This is a lethal dose from a football field away. If you get anywhere near this, you're going to die that week or that day or that hour. Depending on how close you got, you can die right in front of it. That's a medusa. 100,000 sieverts is a medusa. You die. Fukushima Unit 1 and 2 exhaust stacks, high radiation doses, measured at over 10 sieverts per hour. 10 sieverts per hour is a lethal dose. The stacks. So the stacks are those big chimneys. I'll show you a picture after. If they're that radioactive, how bad is it at the reactors? Because the stacks were exhaust, right, for the plants. They're built high, so the radiation lands outside the site. And sites are usually surrounded by farms. And then the food is shipped worldwide to poison everybody. This industry is going to exterminate all of us. It's us or them. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just being rational. Debris from the nuclear near Fukushima plant is being ground up and burned in other parts of Japan. So why do you think that they're grinding it up and bringing it to other prefectures, burning it in the communities, in the incinerators? Because all you're going to do is liberate the isotopes back into the environment. This is madness. Every facet of this story is lunatic madness, yeah? Every facet of it is batshit lunatic crazy. These people are murderers, blatant blank murderers. ABC News, never-ending disaster at Fukushima. Japan is stumbling helplessly from one crisis to the next. Alarming reality at Fukushima plant is faced with a new crisis. Tepco is clearly just hanging on day by day, and they shouldn't even be there. Tepco shouldn't be there. They don't know what to do with a decommissioning. The nuclear industry arranged for Tepco in figure only because they were nationalized by the government and taken over, because they went bankrupt right away. So you can't blame the nuclear industry, you got to blame Tepco. The nuclear industry is responsible for this, not Tepco. The nuclear industry, nuclear academics, nuclear scientists, and physicists. These are responsible for this, not Tepco. Nuclear corporations, nuclear fuel production facilities are responsible for this, not Tepco. Tepco, the nuclear industry confirmed steam came up from underground at reactor number 1, 4.7 sieverts per hour. These are lethal doses of steam coming out of the ground from a China reaction, from a China syndrome, so-called China syndrome, right? It's worse than that, though. Fukushima reactor site engulfed by steam. The site, not steam coming out of the ground, but the site. And do you got any concept of how big a nuclear site actually is? Continuously in the air, work to remove the rubble suspended. Really? You mean workers ran away, 16,000 of them? And we got some extra videos of that coming up later. But there were 6 Geiger counters that'll come up in this story. The video to the right is 40 times normal speed, but I'm going to show you a slower version later. Workers say the ground under the plant is cracking and radioactive steam is coming up. At 6 places, it's lethal doses coming out. But if you look to the right, that steam you're looking at, if you were anywhere there, that's a lethal dose immediately. Feds threaten to sue over law to help sick Hanford workers. So Hanford, there's a law passed at Hanford that if you work there for 8 hours, anywhere in the last 40 years, and you can prove you were there for at least 8 hours, 8 hours for one shift, you're entitled to a pension. Because that's how dangerous radiation actually is. Yeah? And so the feds threaten to sue because the courts, because this is a big battle in court to get, to help the sick and dying workers. So the lunatic nuclear industry refused to stop growing food. Not Tepco, but the nuclear industry. Because nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. So when they melt down, they don't want to stop the farms. This is great. We can poison lots of people this way. That's what they're up to. And I prove it many times, right? Fukushima sake shop opened in New York. The Fukushima prefecture government took the rice that nobody would buy, got it turned into sake, and then actually the government of Fukushima prefecture opened a sake shop in New York City. We don't know where else, but for sure in New York City. If you look at, by 2012, there was 865,000 extra cancer patients, and cancer is just one of 1,800 diseases that can show up. Fukushima prefecture requests that the Japanese government remove Tepco, removed Tepco from management of the Fukushima Daiichi decommissioning because they're not decommissioning, they're just slaughtering the homeless. It's no secret that the Tokyo Electric is incapable of containing the disaster. I mean, this was IAEA should be there all day, every day working, yeah? All their scientists should go there, but they won't even go near it. They got fake pictures of it. Look at these pictures. So when you zoom in, what do you see? Like, these could be the homeless who don't read English, and they put these printed, photocopied pieces of paper with IAEA on the back. Why would you stick that on their back like that? So you can get pictures. There's no other reason to put that on their back, only just to get pictures. Why else would you put that on their back? Oh, and a Tepco sticker. Try wrapping your mind around that one. Tepco investigates radiation levels of exhaust stack. Now, here's a picture of the exhaust stack. So that big stack there, at 25 sieverts per hour near the surface. So if you're going to, that's a lethal dose there, but it's not a lethal dose at the reactors? Well, it is. That's a lethal dose at the reactors. You can't have the stacks being a lethal dose without the reactors being a lethal dose, for God's sakes. Cores at 3 of the plant's reactors have melted down, breaching their containment vessels, New York Times. Tepco maintains the fuel stopped short of breaching the containment vessel. Okay, so here's the vessel right here, 190-foot tall vessel. You can see the building don't even exist. Now, Arnie Gunnarsson made the assemblies for those fuel pools. That's one there and one over there. They're stacked because there's no repository in Japan or anywhere else. So for 40 years, the majority of the fuel, because it's still split in the atom, is kept in those spots. Let's just play that clip very quick for you.
The division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
Exactly like Fukushima. So how come he told everybody they were getting fuel out of a pool? What he done is crimes against humanity. He's probably one of the worst criminals in human history for what he done. He relentlessly, at fair winds, tried to convince the population that they were getting it like a crushed pack of cigarettes, he used to say. Ambassador Kennedy tours the Fukushima Daiichi. Did I get all of this? Hang on. Tepco, nuclear fuel rods and number 4 spent fuel pool are confirmed to be damaged. Damaged! The fuel pools are at the top of the building. The building doesn't exist. So 2014, May 14, 2014, Ambassador Kennedy tours the Fukushima Daiichi site. Power plant, reactor 4. And so here's a headline from 2012. The walls of Unit 4 spent fuel pool have collapsed. There's no water in there, which means it pyrophoric fires, right? So that's reactor 4 right here. They built this structure over it. You get more detail in a minute. The tanks are meant to trick you. Caroline Kennedy, she's pretending she's in the fuel pool. The U.S. ambassador, now she doesn't understand. She's probably at the Daini plant or some other nuclear power plant. She doesn't speak Japanese or read Japanese. It's very easy to deceive someone like that. Spent 3 hours, if she actually physically went there, spent 3 hours visiting the crippled nuclear meltdown when it was raging. So obviously she's not there. On Wednesday, as part of her first trip as ambassador to the Fukushima prefecture. In 2013, the building actually looked like that. And then the fuel pools, that building should be the same height as this one. The fuel pools were at the very top. To look down on it, she had to be almost up to the ceiling to look down on the fuel pools, see? Ambassador Kennedy oversees the spent fuel removal operation at the Fukushima Daiichi Reactor 4 spent fuel pool. But obviously this can't be a spent fuel pool. Like the Japanese, look at her with her hands behind her back. Renewed chain reaction feared at the spent fuel storage pool. That's 2011, March the 20th, reactor number 4. So they built this structure here over it with cranes. They built it somewhere else, brought it in, and they used some homeless, because we got video of it. They would have died that day or that week, by the way. And then they put panels on it, strictly to make you think that it looks like that all of a sudden. These are lunatics. Like, that's the nuclear industry. It's not Japan, it's the nuclear industry. It's the World Nuclear News Association and the rest of them. 100% release of Unit 4 spent fuel pool assumed in the NRC data, and 50% at Unit number 3. Hang on. Well, here's what's left of number 3. They were building a structure over it at that time, but let me show you a picture of it before they started to build the structure. Because the truth matters, I hope. I pray. I wonder. Who knows, anyway. It's an absurd amount of work to do what I'm doing. And I would love to do twice as much, 10 times as much. I'm at full capacity all the time. I never stop. So that's actually reactor 3 before they start to build that structure over it. So that's a support. You can't physically put something touching that, it'll crumble, right? So they built that support around it with cranes and homeless and murdered them. Then they put that structure on top of it. All this was built off site. That's actually 177 feet tall. And so the idea of that, I'll give you another picture. We're going to cover this building tomorrow. So the idea of building that structure over reactor 3 was to trick you the exact same way they tricked you successfully with reactor 4. And so this is the official picture of reactor 3. We're going to cover that tomorrow night. But when they tell you that 50% of the fuel at reactor 4, it's all the fuel, not 50%. That building went off like a firecracker with just a stump left on the ground, right? Okay, let's keep it rolling. Tepco began critical work on loading Fukushima Daiichi Unit 4 spent fuel pool. That's the roof. That's the roof of reactor 4 they're showing you. And that's what they call a dry cast. So, now, these pictures were pretty high quality. You know what I'm like with high quality pictures? I start zooming in on it. And why is this blotted out on a cast for? Because it's in English, it's American maybe? Why is that blotted out up there on that same picture? So the best thing can happen is I get my hands in high quality pictures, because I'll zoom in on every square foot of the picture. And then why is that blotted out? You got nothing to hide. Why are you hiding all of it for? So when they show you this, that single picture, you can zoom way in. Because the building doesn't, if the building doesn't exist, and it doesn't, it looks like this, then which building is that, see? And I mean, if you can't get near this. This is a nuclear meltdown. This is lethal dose. This was 3,400 assemblies. Each assembly has around 100 fuel rods. Each rod is around 18 pounds. Well, it is 18 pounds exactly. And it's 12 feet long. It's full of pellets of uranium plutonium. So doomsday-like radiation release of fire and pool at Unit 4. And it would be a global, a earth killer. And it already has been, but it would dwarf what had already happened, nuclear waste expert. Well, first off, there you go. It collapsed. It burnt. So doomsday-like radiation. So we've seen institutions produce studies showing 20 million particles of radioactive iodine-131 per liter of rainwater. Another study showing 220 million atoms per liter of rainwater, this is from Ottawa, of the iodine-129. But that same liter would have been full of curium, because that's the biggest byproduct. If you're finding 220 million atoms per liter of iodine, it's going to be similar curium and uranium and plutonium and americium and neptunium and technetium and californium and blah, 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 blah. 1,500 atoms of sulfur per cubic meter of air sustained. So originally the building looked like that, and they're showing you pictures over there saying it's fine. I mean, that is disgusting. That is the lowest form of life imaginable. The nuclear industry seems to attract this common denominator of the lowest forms of life in the industry will gravitate towards the nuclear industry because they're like, wow, they're super evil. They're murderers. I'm afraid to kill people with my bare hands, but as I work in the nuclear industry, I can kill millions every year. So reactor 4 is over there. The fuel pool is at the top of the buildings, over there and over there. The reactor core runs all the way up. They remove the fuel underwater and keep it underwater and put it in the pool. To look down on a pool like you've seen in these pictures, you have to be way above the pool. And to take this picture, you're way, like you see him looking down on the fuel pool, you're way above the pool. But you can't be way above a pool that doesn't exist. So why are they lying to you? Right? There's no top to the building, there's no fuel pool to the building. And why did he blot out all the signs on the building? Now, Arnie Gunnarson's going to tell you that he was worried about reactor 4 from the very beginning. Of course, he wasn't. Why is that blotted out? Arnie wants you to think it looks like that, see? Why did they do that? Why is that blotted out? The building doesn't exist, so why are they showing you pictures like this that are blotted out? On Monday at 1500 hours, Tepco workers, which is military, Tepco workers began work removing spent fuel from the crippled Fukushima Daiichi Unit 4 spent fuel pool, which holds 1,500 assemblies. Now, the fact is, there was 3,400 assemblies in those fuel pools because they don't have a repository anywhere in Japan. This project has been labeled by some as one of the most dangerous nuclear operations in human history. And you can see at the top of it, it's showing you a beautiful fuel pool. That's the picture. Most dangerous in history. And it looks like this, does it? You sure it don't look like that? Because that's what it looks like. Each assembly is made up of about 80 fuel rods, which this is how they get the numbers down. Oh, not 100, it's 80. Which by assembly can contain 77,500 trillion becquerels of radioactivity. Okay, hang on. So I'll show you how this actually works. I'm going to bring up the calculator for you. And so think about the number 7,500 trillion. Okay. So a gram of cesium could have 120 curies in it. Okay. So each curie is about 78 times 77 billion atoms. And then you multiply that by 120 curies per gram. Now you multiply a gram by 28 to get an ounce, or 29, is it? Oh, I smurfed that up. So 720 trillion, is it? 720 by 720 trillion. Multiply that by 29 grams in an ounce. Okay, so that's billions. That's trillions. 209 trillion. 209 trillion versus 7,500 trillion. Okay, so an ounce has around 209 trillion atoms, radioactive atoms. Let's multiply that by 16 ounces, which makes 1 pound. So you're far past their number with just a single pound. So when they tell you that the 80 fuel rods in assembly only have 75 trillion becquerels, 7,500 trillion becquerels, which is an absurd amount, by the way, they're not underestimating it. They're lying to you. They hate your guts. They despise you. If you multiply that number of 1 pound by the 5 times 5 million pounds per reactor pool, you can see how big the lie actually is. These numbers are more, you're talking about more atoms than all the grains of sand on Earth combined. And there's multiple pools melted down. So around 1% of plutonium, though, by weight. So if you just use their numbers, it's 1,440, 80 times 18. 1% of plutonium is 14.4 per, and then the assemblies is 18,878 pounds of plutonium per pool at their numbers. This is absurd numbers. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were a couple of pounds of plutonium. Look what that done to our planet. The 2013 World Nuclear Industry Scum Degenerate Status Report claims that the full release from the Unifor spent fuel pool without any containment or control could cause by far the most serious radiological disaster to date. These are serious. It's shocking, eh? The assembly could also be moved too close together to spent fuel rods would break, be exposed to air, potentially ignite. Both scenarios would potentially release a massive amount of radiation, which could necessitate the evacuation of workers from the plant that weren't there in the first place because of the airborne radiation I showed you earlier. If the rods were to overheat or break, self-sustained chain reaction similar to a meltdown in the crippled reactors could be prompt. So what they were trying to trick you into thinking that the reactors and the fuel pools existed, and then ultimately they got it all out safely and stored safely. See? Why would they go through all that trouble though? Because it didn't happen. It didn't exist. It already blew up and caught fire and blew up, and now it's exterminating all species on the planet. Japan is working to speed up decommissioning. Now, I showed you a little piece of this. Workers are paid $11 a day. They would do the most technical job in human history. Or they're paid $11 a day to pretend that they're doing the most technical job in history. In Fukushima City, over 90,000 houses are eligible for decontamination. So if 90,000 houses are radioactive and should be decontaminated, you shouldn't be living there. This is simple logic. This is the nuclear industry, though. The nuclear industry, they make the Nazis look like Boy Scouts, right? They really do. They make the Nazis look like good people. The Nazis are actually good compared to these people. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. New map of radioactive iodine released from Fukushima Daiichi. This was an American plane flying over a U.S. aircraft 1,000 feet above the ground, measuring iodine, and you can see 3 million becquerels per square meter. These numbers are insane numbers, by the way, we're talking about. Were recorded from aerial radiation surveys, which are incredibly, horrifically under accuracy. They're nowhere near accurate. Conducted near 1,000 feet above the ground. Been gathered between April the 2nd and the 3rd of 2011, 1,000 feet up in the air. Showed 3 million becquerels per square meter, 20 kilometers away from the nuclear plant. 3 million becquerels, 1,000 feet off the ground. This is what they're showing. You're talking about hell. They're still growing food there. They never stopped growing food there and shipping it worldwide. And if you go and look up nuclear power plant pictures of them, you'll see almost every picture of nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. They built it in farm country, and it's not by accident. This is a murder cult. This is a genocide, omnicide cult. The nuclear industry is 100% in increments exterminating all of us and all species. Now they've gone into overdrive. The whole industry is just revolting, yeah? It is expected that research in Japan will use to estimate the amount of iodine received by residents' thyroid glands. You can expect all you want, but that's not what happened, was it? Tepco emits contaminated water leaking from multiple temporary storage pits. Storage pits. What you're seeing, look at those things there. You see people actually physically walking on top of that. That's not going to be full of radioactive water. You're not getting up and walking on top of something that's full of radioactive water like this. But let's go through the narrative. So those big rectangle squares are actually like bladders. So they're 60 meters long, 180 feet long, over 150 feet wide, and they're over 18 feet deep. And they're lined with 3 layers of waterproof sheets meant to keep the contaminated water from leaking into the surrounding environment. According to the utility, the scum degenerates and the Nuclear Coward Regulatory Authority, radiation levels between the sheets used to layer the pits were measured at 6,000 becquerels per cubic centimeter. Per cubic centimeter. It's bad enough when you do liters, right? But when you do cubic centimeters, 6,000 becquerels per centimeter. Like, think of how big a cubic centimeter actually is. It's 2.5 centimeters to get an inch. It's like so tiny. So when you scale that up to the size of a liter, there's zero possibility you're getting up and walking around on it. Zero. Zilch. Nothing. Zero. Right, you had 1,000 tanks in 2013, plus the bladders, because that's 2013. They had 1,200 tanks, they said, in 2014. They had 900 tanks in 2017. You can go watch last night's video. I showed you all that. They had 900 tanks in 2017. I already told you that. 1,000 tanks in 2019 and 1,000 tanks in 2021. So they had 1,000 tanks in 2013 and 1,000 tanks in 2021. But they're filling tanks up all the time. And last night's video was just brilliant, like in the context of documentation. So was tonight. We got just loads of documentation for everybody again tonight, right? 6,000 becquerels per cubic centimeter. Okay, so 15,000 becquerels per cubic inch. How many cubic inches are in a liter again? I forget. So let's say it's, I can't even do the math here. It's an absurd number. They're perpetual liars. That's what this industry, they can't open their pie hole without lying. They're murderers. So there's 13,000 tons of highly, highly contaminated water to an adjacent tank and storage pit. Transfer the remaining 13,000 tons at 6,000 becquerels or 15,000 becquerels for a cubic inch. You can't get near the hoses. You can't get near the tanks again. You can't actually get near these bags. You can't get within 100 meters of the bags without getting a lethal dose if you actually put it in the bag. It's strictly meant to trick you into thinking they didn't kill the Pacific. That's what that's all about. One senior piece of shit Tepco official said at a news conference Sunday, it's difficult for the plant to store all the radioactive water in the temporary tanks, which is why they were forced to keep the contaminated water in underground pits. No, there's monitors going on, so they're pretending. Tepco failed to deliver on promise to install a fence to restrict contamination from leaking into the Pacific Ocean. Oh yeah, a fence is going to stop it, is it? You'll like this one, though. More than 2.5 years after Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, officials in Japan have now admitted in June 2011, March, April, May, June, Tepco promised to build a fence to block the radioactive water from leaking. Leaking! The reactors needed 4,500 tons every minute before they melted down to stop them from melting down. To stop them from going in a chain reaction, you're actually going to need more for each reactor per minute. But they're not even actually install the fences. They didn't install the fences because it was cost $1 billion. Now, Tepco didn't actually exist at that stage. They were nationalized by the Japanese government. In other words, they were taken over because they were bankrupt. The government not to announce that they had committed to constructing the fences, as the utility was concerned the $1 billion construction costs would increase its debt. 3 months after the nuclear meltdown, they're worried about $1 billion. Does anybody really appreciate how much they actually spent? The government agreed not to publicize the arrangement because they're the arrangement themselves. They run Tepco. Tepco did not undertake the work they promised to complete. So when you add all these little stories up, though, you get this picture that, holy shit, eh? Hopefully you do. More contaminated water leaks, the Fukushima Daiichi reported. Workers were transferring contaminated water between leaking underground storage pits. Yeah, right. 290,000 becquerels. So you thought 6,000 becquerels per cubic centimeter was bad? 290,000 becquerels of radiation per cubic centimeter. So it's 1 million becquerels per cubic inch. These are absurd numbers. You can't transfer that. Everybody dies. These are Medusas. The nuclear industry is such a degenerate... Never mind. They're such scum, though. At least some 22 liters contaminated water containing 6.3 billion becquerels of radioactivity leaked. Which is 22 liters. Each liter would be 286 million becquerels per liter. To keep that in context, if that was actually sitting here when I started the show, I'd be dead right now from that 1 liter. From just the gamma shine, the neutron burst. Tepco plans to dump the water stored at Fukushima Daiichi 2013 into the Pacific. The plant has already released enormous amounts of highly contaminated water directly into the ocean. Enormous amounts. After the water passes through the crippled units, it is processed through the SARI system to remove cesium. Now go back to this story here, 2013. If you go back last night when I covered the tanks, the Arriva system for filtration and the ALP system did not work, period, all the way up until August the 12th, 2014. They couldn't even get near the machines because they were lethal doses. You couldn't get back in to the room because it's lethal doses. Because once you start filtering it, now the filter is this millions of sieverts. The industry is a perpetual lie. Maybe that's why I do what I do, I suppose. It's not processed to remove cesium. Well, again, you see the word cesium, right? You're not trying to remove cesium. You're trying to remove the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods is curium isotopes. Hence the reason they call a nuclear reactor core melted down a curium. And you need lead shielding 20 times thicker for curium than you do for plutonium. And plutonium is lethal on the atomic levels. I've been overwhelmed by complexity and concentrations of contamination found at Fukushima. Yeah, 290,000 per centimeter becquerels, or 1,000,000 becquerels per cubic inch. We're talking absurd numbers, by the way. Tepco. The Japanese government, the nuclear industry estimates show that the volume of contaminated water required to be stored on site will likely triple over the next 3 years. The system didn't work even in late 2014. We showed that last night's show. So absorbed doses, average disposition 137 on the soil of cesium. Fukushima City is 230,000. So back to that story. We're still on that story, by the way, right? So far, only 4,000 houses have been cleaned. You can't decontaminate a house, by the way. So 90,000 houses are supposed to be razed and then taken to a repository. You can't decontaminate a house. Japan is actually insane. Okay, so these videos is the China syndrome releasing plumes. So this is the China syndrome. Now I'm going to speed this up to, oh my God, numbers. That's 2 different views. So if you're in that plume, this is 100 times the normal speed. And this is sustained this went on for several years. On and off from the China syndrome. That's a lethal dose anywhere. And even when it disappears, that's still a lethal dose. Here's a really good, clean video of it. Now this was, I'm not sure of the speed. I think it's 20 times the normal speed. Yeah, 20 times the normal speed. This is taken directly from Tepco's website. So this is the China syndrome, where the reactor cores at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures interacting with the water tables 100 feet below, and then the steam coming up. This is lethal doses. Absurd lethal doses. This is absurd lethal doses you're talking about. And it's only another few more seconds of the video that we actually have. But what you're going to see, what you got to appreciate is that's drifting all the way to the northern hemisphere. That's covering the whole northern hemisphere. This was sustained for many months like this. They abandoned that site for many, many months. Because once that plume touches anything, that's now massive doses. Tepco gets approval to release more Fukushima radioactive water into the Pacific. The utility hopes to be able to process and dump 150 of the 300 tons of contaminated water being produced daily. The reactors need 4,500 tons a minute normally, each building. 4 buildings detonated, caught fire, and lost their entire inventory of reactor cores and the fuel pools at the top of the buildings. They covered the northern hemisphere. So when they're telling you that they're putting 150 tons to 300 tons a day in the tanks, they had 1,000 tanks in 2013 and 1,000 tanks in 2021 this year. Nothing's going into the tanks. If you fill the tank up with the numbers I'm showing you earlier, you can't build another tank within a couple of thousand feet of it. You can't get on the site again if you put a couple of these tanks on the site with the numbers I've showed you already. Go back and look at last night's show and you build 1 tank of that number and you can't get back on the site. 2.2 sieverts per liter. Tepco admits the ice wall will not stop groundwater from entering the crippled Fukushima Daiichi building. So the ice wall, they built the ice wall because the government paid for it. This week, the Japanese government officials had a meeting with officials from the... There is no officials with the Nuclear Regulatory Authority. There is no regulatory authority. There's this bizarre death cult. That's part of the death cult, is the nuclear regulation authorities. They were created the year after the nuclear meltdown, on top of that. And Japan admitted that the ice wall they promoted as an impermeable barrier to prevent groundwater from entering the crippled reactor buildings and mixing with highly radioactive water, has failed to work as built and is technically incapable of blocking off the groundwater. Currently, 400 tons of groundwater flow into the damaged reactor buildings every day and mixes with the highly radioactive water in the basement. First off, they're pouring water on the melted reactor cores. That's going directly over the reactor cores and on down through the basement and on down to the 100 feet down. They built that site 100 feet up on top of a riverbed that still exists. So it's bedrock. And that's the old shit plan for a nuclear plant, is the reactor core, if it melts down, it hits bedrock where there's a river, and the river washes it into the ocean or a lake or a river. That's their plan for all nuclear power plants. And so when they tell you there's 400 tons of groundwater flowing into the damaged reactor buildings every day, the reactors need 4,500 tons every minute. That's before they melt down, before they go 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. Perpetual lies in the basement. Tepco's developed the ice wall and installed subdrain wells. Oh, Tepco has. Give your head a shake. Because they don't want the word nuclear industry anywhere per se in that. So they use Tepco, a corporation. A corporation, so anything goes wrong, you blame it on the corporation. The corporation goes bankrupt, you got no one to blame anymore, right? But you're not going to be blaming the nuclear industry, you're going to blame the corporation. That's what this is all about. Tepco doesn't even exist. It was nationalized on top of that. These are lunatics. Again, you see the truth. Before installation of the wall, the ice wall began operating in March of 2013, but has not yet made a meaningful impact or reduced the amount of groundwater that enters the reactor buildings. And experts are concerned the increasing levels of highly radioactive water in the reactor building could escape into the local environment in the event of a heavy rainfall or tsunami. The walls don't have a basement. The water that's in there goes straight down 100 feet to the water tables. In fact, the whole site is liquefaction. They are turning the ground into quicksand at Fukushima plant. Fukushima worker, I'm worried about the pressure forcing water up the cracks. The levels are rising on the mountainside because it can't flow because of the walls. And they couldn't freeze the ground. It actually didn't work. Land under Fukushima reactor building at risk of turning into liquid. Area near a sea could become like mud, and it did. Tepco says the groundwater bypass operations not having effect at Fukushima Daiichi. Officials admit the groundwater bypass operations are failing to reduce the tons of water, tons, from entering the crippled reactor buildings. Crippled! Does that look like it's crippled to you? That's the stub of a 190-foot reactor. There is no crippled, because there's no building. Just saying. According to a corporation, not the nuclear industry, because they're not going to stick their nose in there, at least 400 tons of groundwater flow into the reactors each day comes in contact with extremely contaminated material. Like, why are you listening to Tepco? Why not use science instead of Tepco's lies? The utility announced the groundwater bypass operation would reduce the amount of groundwater by 100 tons per day in hopes of extracting groundwater before it entered the building and redirecting it to the Pacific. At a news conference on Monday, a Tepco official told reporters that after 2 months, beginning pump operation. Utility has yet to see any real effect from the operation at the water levels in the buildings. He said they don't know when, if ever, the pumping operation will have any tangible effect on groundwater levels. And in June, Tepco was also forced to admit that the ice wall operation, which was intended to control groundwater, was unsuccessful. You haven't heard tell of the ice wall, have you, in years and years? That's because it didn't work, see? They don't want to tell you that, though. After 2 months, they don't want to tell you anything. After 2 months of pumping calcium chloride, which is meant to freeze, see, into the ground near Unit 2, officials announced they weren't able to get the water to freeze to form the ice wall. And by the way, that technique of freezing the ground was just meant to be a very temporary fix, like to repair a dam or something like that. It was never meant for this application, never meant for long term. And the reality of it is, this was to hoodwink you, to get you to stop looking, and it worked, right? There is no ice wall. Tepco's ice wall operation not meeting expectations 2014. And in 2014, we learned that there was no filtration of water, period, nothing. Ice wall nearly a mile long at the Unit 2 with an estimated 11,000 tons of contaminated wastewater believed to collect in an attempt to stem contamination. Plans to drill freeze wells at 3 feet intervals to create an ice wall nearly a mile long in an attempt to stem the contamination from entering the ocean. All of it's meant to trick you, deceive you, manipulate you into thinking that the ocean is not being harmed. At the time, experts were not confident the ice wall plan would be successful. The ice wall was constructed, it would only drive the wastewater even deeper underground. And Tepco pushed forward with the project because it was free money, because it was an experimental wall. Tepco didn't have to pay for it. And Tepco did, because Tepco is nationalized, it's the government. So ultimately the government paid for it. It was $450 million, and everybody knew it couldn't work, and it didn't. We have yet to form the ice stopper because we can't make the temperature low enough to freeze the water, said the creeps at Tepco. Anyway, Tepco unable to bring contaminated water issues under control at Fukushima Daiichi. The utility operated by the Fukushima Daiichi plant promised to treat all contaminated water by March 2015. A goal it is now admitting will not be realized. And there are certain parts of the site where we don't have full control. In other words, you can't go there because you dropped dead. See? Tanks were built hastily to hold highly contaminated water, which led to a variety of leaks. You're talking 2.2 sieverts per litre. If a gallon leaks out, you die. Whoever walks past it dies. Not only that, you can't get, even if it doesn't leak, you can't get within 1,000 feet of the tank. The tanks are actually empty. You can't fill these tanks up. They're bolted together, they're gonna leak. The Advanced Liquid Processing System, ELP, has yet to function reliably. That's April 2014, but I covered the ELP system and the Areva system last night, all the way up to August 12, 2014. They didn't work. And they were too radioactive to dismantle. Tepco communications were severed after evacuating critical workers from the plant. For the better part of last year and a half, Tepco has been strongly criticized for allegedly attempting to evacuate all staff from a nuclear meltdown, which has continued to release radioactive material directly into the atmosphere for the last 21 months. Directly into the atmosphere. It's a continuous plume covering the entire northern hemisphere. The next day, the situation spiraled further out of control and a massive explosion ripped apart Reactor 4 building. Multiple fires were observed. The Japanese government appeared reluctant to divulge too much information about the situation for fear of causing panic. That's 2012 December. The Japanese government appeared reluctant to divulge too much information about the situation for fear of causing panic. Ripped apart the Reactor 4 building. This is what it looked like in 2013. Here's another media reporting in 2013, pretending the building is perfect.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
So, faking being in a building that don't exist, why would they do something like that? Explosion at Fukushima 1, 3, 4 may have caused the inventory, the nuclear rods, to be lost from the spent fuel pools. Gee, I don't know. Do you think the explosion lost the reactor core and the fuel pools? Huh? Do you? Because the fuel pools were at the top of the building. So was the reactor core in the center there. There's 2 fuel pools. They have no repository anywhere in Japan, so they're stuffed for 40 years with reactor cores. There's the building over there. That's a comparable height difference. There's nothing left there. You can, if you were safe enough to walk inside the destroyed piece of stump that's left there, there's nothing functional left, not even a light switch. If you were looking at these are 150-foot wide buildings you're looking at. They were 190 feet high, 19 stories high buildings. If you think of them in proper. So this is the stump that's left. So they're building that thing there. This is either photoshopped or the homeless getting in paper suits. In paper suits where you're surrounded by neutron bursts and gamma shines. So they built this structure like this over reactor 4. They cantilevered it over the building. And in this one here, you can see where they're starting to lay panels. So then it looks like this, but you can see below it, it's completely destroyed. There is nothing, no integrity. And then that's the official picture, what it looks like inside the panels. Like, seriously, wrap your mind around that kind of hoodwinking. Wrap your mind around how evil you actually got to be to do something like that. How evil the nuclear industry got to be. How evil the universities and the media to go along with this. No academic of any discipline is ever called a lawyer. Even Greenpeace refused to acknowledge that's not real. Right, so they built a structure that don't physically touch it. And here's the whole process up there, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. And voila, everything is now perfect. Now it's a normal boiling water reactor. But it's not, yeah? Look at the debris on the deck over there. I go through so much work sometimes just to tell this story. You see all the debris right there? You see all the debris right here. And I showed you behind it. I'll show you other pictures. In fact, here, hang on. So you see the debris on this side of it. Do you really think inside of those panels it looks like that? Of course you don't, if you're honest. Do you really think behind that panel it looks like this? Does anybody think that they left that there because they were lazy or because it's lethal doses? And lethal doses meant it can't look like that, and you can't go inside of it. Right? And this is a 190-foot building behind these people. Again, we always see this picture where they got paper suits on. If you go to work at a construction site with paper suits on, it's going to tear. No matter what you do, you're going to tear it open, yeah? There's no integrity to paper suits. Go buy those paper suits you use for painting your room and see how long it takes before you tear it open. Go out to a place where everything is ripped apart and see how long. See, these are fake, or they would have died that day. These are nuclear meltdowns. Does that look like a 190-foot building over there to you? How much evidence do you need? Because I'll get it for you. If you're still on the fence, then you must be impaled on it because you're stupid. They couldn't get into the control room for 7 years because it's too radioactive. But by year 3, they're inside a nuclear meltdown and this building doesn't even exist. They can't get in the control room for 7 full years. The lunatic, Arnie Gunnarsson, and his lunatic wife, Megan Gunnarsson, they should be arrested and jailed for 1,000 years, yeah?
Now, the division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima. And Unit 4 has always been my biggest concern. Unit 4 has always been my biggest concern. If you
watch his wife shaking her
Unit
head.
4 has always been
Lizard.
my biggest concern.
Like a lizard.
If you watched our website, on the very first week of the accident, I was saying that if Unit 4 were to catch fire, you'd have to evacuate Tokyo.
Yeah, well, Ernie, I don't know if anybody ever told you, but that's Unit 4, look. Not the one behind you. Arnie Gunnarsson has never come out and disavowed that picture. How come? He was in all the headlines, all the stories. They were interviewing Arnie Gunnarsson, all TV shows, medias, interviewed him and saying, how dangerous is it going to be, Arnie, to get the fuel out of the fuel pool at Reactor 4? Oh, it's like a crush pack of cigarettes. Someone should tear all the hair off his head. Like, just tear it right off his head. Legally, right? Take him to court. And the punishment is to tear all the hair out of his head and then put him on death row with his wife.
I hired employees that could only stay on the job for 3 minutes before they exceeded their personnel exposure.
Personal exposure. That's a lethal dose. When you're going to a spot where you can only spend 3 minutes, and then these were homeless, obviously, he's talking about. There's no nuclear academic going to go into an environment where your dose is exceeded in 3 minutes. He's on TV on CNN doing that. Gunnarsson, move south of the equator if Unit 4 goes dry. So Unit 4 is the pools. He's talking about the pools at the top of the building. I'll put him up there to help you appreciate how evil this person actually is.
The division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
So when he says go south of the equator if Reactor 4 goes dry, and he doesn't call out CNN and ABC and BBC for faking it, and he doesn't admit that the building to the left is the actual building, then what does that make Gunnarsson? Now, why did he say move south of the equator if Unit 4 goes dry? Why would he say that? Well, because you get headlines like this: radioactive xenon 133 in Washington at 133 or 450,000 times above, and it persisted for a week. So that's a lethal dose to all the species. Top scientists, Fukushima's most terrifying situation I can imagine. And I've seen a paper which says it's bye-bye Japan and evacuate the northern hemisphere. West Coast, if Unit 4 goes after a quake. After a quake. Well, first, let's listen to David Suzuki.
3 out of the 4 plants were destroyed in the earthquake and in the tsunami. The 4th one has been so badly damaged that the fear is if there's another earthquake of a 7 or above, that building will go, and then all hell breaks loose. I have seen a paper which says that if, in fact, the 4th plant goes under an earthquake and those rods are exposed, it's bye-bye Japan, and everybody on the west coast of North America should evacuate. Now, if that isn't terrifying, I don't know what. Fukushima is the most terrifying situation I can imagine.
So leave, abandon, bye-bye Japan, abandon the Northern Hemisphere. And Arnie Gunnarsson said, get out of the Northern Hemisphere, go to the South if it goes. So if there's an earthquake, right, resulting destruction will take half a planet if there's an earthquake. That's the radioactive followers, see? They already, look at the abandoned community to your right. So how many earthquakes did you have around that nuclear power plant? That's earthquakes, aftershocks, all around the nuclear power plant. Look. That's 5,000 earthquakes by the 4th of April 2011. 5,000 aftershocks. Let's play that again, because some of them are pretty big, right? See, look how big that fella was. They're on the Japanese scale, which is a scale of 7. Exposed radiation streaming into the atmosphere after number 4 pool boils dry in a fire. Boiled dry. So it's all gone. Fukushima worst case beyond 250 kilometers could be evacuation zone if fuel in spent fuel pool number 4 melts, covering the pool reactor with sand mixture, which is considered as the last resort. Well, this is homeless spraying regions to bind to the particles and knock him out of the air. He would have died that day. That's what the building looked like shortly after the detonation. That's reactor 3 and 3 to the right and 4. We're almost through. That's another picture of reactor 4. That's a 190-foot building completely and utterly destroyed, yeah? Irresponsible rumors claim Fukushima spent fuel pool exploded. Well, the fuel pools exploded, man. They don't exist anymore. What kind of evidence, more evidence do you need? And the same thing with reactor 3, yeah? To your left. We're going to cover reactor 3 tomorrow night. I'm burnt out already. It's been such a long day for me. Fukushima radioactive release into the ocean can continue for thousands of more years. So I'm going to end the show here because that's pretty long. But if you watch my video from last night later on, if you haven't seen it, about the tanks, then you know that the ocean, how they're hoodwinking you. That's such an important video last night. And tonight, those two videos, they really bring like an absurd amount of knowledge to people that are trying to absorb what really happened here. And Fukushima has emerged as a global threat. Yeah, of course it has. Experts agree many species of wildlife and fisheries are endangered globally due to Fukushima. 200-year wait at Fukushima, no idea how to decommission the reactors because they won't go there. Nuclear academics won't go near it, see? Mayor says Tokyo citizens were irradiated. Don't eat food from Japan. This is not rocket science. Just don't be careful when you're buying food. Like if you're eating food from Japan or giving it to your children, they can have leukemia in a couple of days' time. Like, would you bring them to a nuclear dump and feed them radiation? Don't eat food from Japan. This is what he took down my site last week. While I was on an expedition 450 kilometers away from home, busted up. I haven't stopped. I can't even remember the last time I actually come to a stop. I've lost track of years now. So we need to raise enough money. I got 4 more to get through here. We need to raise enough money to buy a piece for the outboard motor I showed at the beginning of the show, and to get it installed, blah, 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 blah. And if not, then I got to do a fundraiser tomorrow to get the equipment, to get the pieces. like this is August. We're running out of time. We got to get out there and try to finish out this research. So it's about $270 for. I showed it earlier. Anyway, there's no sense doing it to you again tonight. Links are below the video. We need to raise about $500. I also got to get an impeller for the 9.9 because it's not pumping water. It's because it's never getting any use, right? So it dried out, and so who knows how much that's going to cost me. I got a guy who can install it for me. He's reasonable prices. Because if you go to their shops, they're going to rob you. They're going to rob you. And I can't run this operation if people don't help me. And so people are going to have to make sacrifices the same as me. Single Tokyo Award with 13 schools with radiation levels above it. 29 million becquerels a square meter in Tokyo. One more headline. Nuclear engineer, I agree Fukushima can be an extinction event. So that's what we're researching. So we've done interior research. I still got to show the last footage and pictures. And I actually took a bunch of videos when I was going through communities on the quad this time. Because you can drive right through communities with the quads here on the East Coast. It's the strangest thing imaginable. When you're doing it, it's totally bizarre. And but there's no... All the spiders are missing from the forest, for goodness sakes. There's no more flocks of birds in the sky. Everybody's, no, everything is normal, Dana. It's all normal. Never was any flocks of birds, Dana. There never was spiders. Pff, are you crazy? What the hell is a spider, Dana? No such thing as it. Never existed. The nuclear industry has no fucking right to exist, period. Has no fucking right to exist. Excuse the language. Has no right to exist. You're degenerate cowards. You're degenerate murderers. You're idiots. You're destroying everybody's future, including your own children and your friends and your families and your loved ones. Get a life. Go get a real fucking job somewhere, you the scumbags. I apologize. I'm just sick of it. Murder and everything is... Come out and tell lie after lie after lie, showing fake buildings. And that's considered acceptable because you bought the media, you captured the regulators, and captured key positions in the governments when people weren't paying attention. Well, they're starting to pay attention. And hopefully they're looking for revenge because I want revenge. I'm not at this because I'm bored. I want revenge for what you've done to everybody and the species on this planet. The only planet we got. And if people don't speak out for the 8 million species, they ain't got a voice. We got to do what's right. We have to have a moral compass. Moral compass is to hold them accountable. There's links below in the description, right below the video. There's only 2 links. That's the only 2 ways you can donate to me. And if not, then I'm doing a live show sometime tomorrow. And it's going to be a fundraiser. And what have I got? Less than 100 subscribers. Last week I had 24,000. So we identified the codes for the problem with the boat. We got to get the boat back out on the water. And I'm chewing through fuel trying to solve this problem on top of that. I'm heartbroken. I haven't got any money to fund this operation. I'm good to go. I'm game on, man. I'm ready to rock. I'm ready to deal with, get out and do the research, and I'm ready to go to war. But I can't do it without some help. I'm just doing the best I can. You're lucky that I'm not wealthy. If I was wealthy, the nuclear industry would already be dead. The nuclear industry would be dead. If I had funding, I'd murder the industry in no time at all. Less than a year, I'd wreck the industry permanently. Everybody on the planet would be trying to cut their fucking throats. Legally, of course. It's okay for them to hate us, want to murder us, but we got to do it legally. We got to get them back legally, right? Is a thumbs up? Yeah. Doesn't matter what they believe, is what got to get done. It's not a game, okay? I'm not here for amusement. And it might be amusing sometimes, but I'm not here for amusement. I'm here to go to war for you and your friends and your families and your loved ones. You got the moral high ground. They got to be held accountable. That's the bottom line. And soon this whole planet will be looking for revenge. That's going to be a good day. Good night, everybody. Dana Nasana, Optics, Tom Morris, Jilton Incorporation. Might as well do a shout out while I'm at the end of the show here. Jeff Maney, Ted Richards, Timo, Darrell Murray. You're welcome. I'm so burnt out that, because when I get burnt out, yeah, I'm burnt out. I've been at the boat all day. I got 3 little leaks. Oh, and the front pontoon on the boat, the valve on that is actually leaking air now. I sprayed bubbly water into it because it started losing pressure the last couple of days. And so the valve is actually leaking because they're old valves. So when I got to raise enough money to pick up a valve, I need 2 valves. I need an extra valve, right? Ella, good night, everybody. I'm just going to double check. I only serve 1 king. Do a little shout out because it doesn't matter. We've been at it this long. What's the big deal if I do a few minutes shout out, right? Besides, I like doing the shout out. And shout out to everybody who's watching this later. Hugs for you. And everybody who's watching now, and I didn't see them, they didn't comment because they don't have a comment abilities. Hugs for you. This is not a game, folks. Join the war. Join the fight. Get educated. Because the day is coming when you wish you were. Rock Nemeth, you're welcome. Thank you. Just hope I didn't miss anybody. My eyesight's starting to give out on me a little bit, I notice. After all these years, I might actually need glasses at some point, I guess. I'm so lucky to be able to see good at this age, right? Magic Mushroom Prophet. Because I'm reading on a little tiny laptop about 4.5 feet away from me. The comment section. That's pretty good. Chad. Thank you, Chad. Just make sure I didn't miss anybody. And there you go. Apologize for swearing. I see I've been censored heavily. In fact, today, every time I checked my site, I couldn't, if you know how you get like comments or stuff like that, that wouldn't open for me. Every day there's something going on. My site doesn't work. Some parts of my site won't work since I started this new channel. God bless. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody. Hopefully tomorrow. I'm not doing a fundraiser, but I will. If I got to raise the money, I got to raise the money. I'm not going to sit in silence. And it's not trying to raise a lot. We like to raise $400 to $500. I got to get a valve for the front pontoon on the big Zodiac. I got to get an impeller for the 9.9 horsepower kicker. I got to get... turn that down a bit. I got to get a $270 valve to fix the code on the engine, blah, 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 blah. Got to pay somebody to do it. Going to need more fuel to run back and forth to St. John's. So close to 500 is scraping the barrel for sure. All I can do is try, and I will try. Make no mistake about it. Good night, everybody. God bless. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow, hopefully. Have a wonderful night and day tomorrow. God bless.